please.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
Hi everyone, this is me, and I'm so excited to be back for our second episode of Things We Carry in collaboration with SAAHAS for Cause and Bharat FM. Things We Carry is about the rituals, patterns, and practices we inherit from our families and from our communities, and the ones that we choose to carry on, and the ones that we choose to redefine or forgo completely. And today, I'm so excited. I have Dristi Angdembey, who is an MD and PhD candidate at the University of Southern California's Keck School of Medicine. She is brilliant, as you can probably tell, and she recently completed her third year of medical school and is currently pursuing a master's degree in public health. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of California, Irvine in biological sciences, and she is born and raised in Nepal. And Dristi is committed to working in Nepali women's empowerment. As an intern for ActionWorks Nepal, she worked in women's health programs focused on dignified menstruation, which, as we know from our last conversation, is a really big issue in the South Asian community and beyond as well. She's worked with the Society of American Nepalese Nurses to organize health fairs for the Nepali American community in Southern California. And currently she's collaborating with SAAHAS for Cause on domestic violence programs as a part of their Nepali community outreach. And as a note, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we are going to be touching briefly on some sensitive topics. If you or someone you know is in need of immediate assistance, please reach out to SAAHAS for Cause at info@saahasforcause.org. And I'm going to kick it to Dristi to tell us a little bit more about herself and her background and fill in any gaps that I might have missed while speaking about your many accomplishments.
Wow, thank you so much, Varshini. Thank you. That was a great introduction. You did a better job of building me up than I ever could, really.
If you don't brag about yourself, I will brag about you for you always. Goes for all my guests.
You're always hyping me up. I love that. So hi, everybody. My name is Dristi Angdembey. I'm, like Varshini said, an MD and PhD candidate at USC. And I just completed my third year of med school, and I'm pursuing a master's in public health with a focus on global health. And my main mission in terms of career goals is to work in women's health and women's empowerment.
I absolutely love that. And I also want to say that you are part of the Nepali community, which I am so excited to have you just speaking about the community and your personal experiences. I don't want you to feel like you're a representative for the entire community, but I think in the world of South Asian Desi stories and representation, there is so little about the Nepali community and your stories, your voices. So I'm just really excited to have you here and just learn more about your perspective. And something new for this show that I didn't mention last time, if you're watching and you want to drop in any questions, comments, any opinions that differ from anything that we talk about, you can actually drop them in the chat box and we'll have them projected on the screen and try to touch on them. And obviously, Dristi is studying so much of what we're going to be talking about today, so she can also give her opinion if she feels comfortable. But the first question I want to ask you is, can you tell me a little bit about your background, about your immigration story? When did you move to the US? When did your parents move here? Let's get into that whole world of things.
Yeah, thank you again for giving me this platform. And so basically, I was born and raised in Nepal, like you said, and I moved here with my family when I was 12 years old. Mm-hmm. My dad was already studying in a university in Iowa, and a year after he came to America, my mom, my brother, and I were invited as well. Mm-hmm. So we actually moved to Florida, and we lived there for a year. And then we moved to Southern California, and Southern California has been home ever since for me.
That's awesome. So you said you moved here when you were 12, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I feel like 12 is difficult anywhere in the world. What an awkward time in everyone's life. You could not pay me enough to be 12 ever again. I don't want to go back to that time. So yeah. I think with the move, with all this like adjustment, this completely new environment, what was that like? Like, how did your parents try to preserve culture for you? Because obviously you spent a significant amount of your life before that in Nepal. So how did that work moving here and just acclimating to this new environment? And what role did your parents play in that?
Yeah, so like you said, 12 is a difficult time for anyone. And for me personally, it was very difficult because of the move. I had huge culture shock when I moved to the US, and it was really hard for me to adjust to life here. And to be honest, it took me well up until I was in college to really feel, at home. And my parents really put a lot of emphasis on preserving our culture, our rituals, by making sure that we were still celebrating major festivals like Dasai Tihar, which, by the way, happy Dasai.
Oh,
I know it's Navaratri for a lot of for a lot of Indian ethnic groups as well. And we have our Dasai, which is like Dasara, and yeah, it was really amazing to have that, to keep me rooted to my culture, to my people. We also had our Nepali communities in Florida and in SoCal that kept us connected as well. We always went to like Nepali parties and celebrations. And for me personally, I wanted that connection, right? When I moved here, one of the first things I told my mom was like, please send me back. Back to Nepal, where my friends and my family are. I have a huge extended family there as well, but I'm glad she didn't. And I'm glad I'm here with my family and pursuing a degree in medicine.
And do you have any siblings? Was this experience different for you compared to any siblings that you have? Like, I feel like in the same home, I have a younger sister. We moved to India, then we moved back. And I think she and I had vastly different experiences and continue to this day, even though we grew up in the same home and everything like that. So any siblings?
Yeah, that resonates with me so strongly. I have a younger brother, and he was, I want to say 9. Yeah, we're 3 years apart. So he was 9 years old when we moved. And for him, it seemed like the move didn't really affect him as much as it affected me. And like I said earlier, I wanted to be connected to my culture. I wanted to like maintain those rituals, but for my brother, he didn't care. And I think it was easier for him to adjust in a way because of that. But now that we're both adults, I'm 27 years old and he's 24 years old. It's kind of sad that like he doesn't show as much interest to be engaged in Nepali culture.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, it's just so shocking. And I think an entire study can be done in and of itself, like how 2 children in the same home respond completely differently to like these environmental stressors. And you're the older daughter, so am I. I think being the older daughter in a South Asian home is its own set of baggage, is its own set of responsibilities and roles that you have when you're really, really young. And I think, in my case, at least, my parents didn't put that pressure on me, but I think it's hardwired into our DNA at this point to put it on ourselves. So did you have that experience being the older daughter and like having a younger brother to kind of like care for through all these changes and moves? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I definitely think there was a significant difference in expectations for the both of us from our parents. And now that I'm older, I kind of can understand. I can understand, like, I've reflected on my childhood and the way, like, our parents raised us. And, at that time, when I was going through my own struggles, I was, like, just struggling, right? And I was just, like, thinking, me. But now that I think about it, now that I think about my parents' struggles, moving here, and taking care of 2 young kids, making sure that they go to school and stuff, making sure that our immigration papers are in order, and having to provide food and shelter for us, and moving from state to state, that must have been so stressful.
Yeah.
So I understand how like the expectations they had for me and my brother were also kind of in alignment with that, like mentality of working hard and just grinding and trying to do your best. And as the older daughter too, I think they had a higher set of expectations for me. They had a higher standard for me. And also just speaking like as an older daughter in a brown family, right? I think we also have to recognize the intergenerational trauma that women in our family had to carry in the past. Like for my own family, I can speak about my grandmother who was married to an older man when she was much, much younger, when she was a teenager, and she ran away, because she was like, why is this being put on me?
Yeah, I think it's completely true. Like we just carry these expectations and these ideas from older generations through us. And I think unless you take a second, step back, and you're like, oh, it doesn't have to be this way. I don't have to make sure the next generation has the same experience. I think that's a really difficult realization to come to. And I talk to my friends about this a lot, where they'll speak to women in their family and it's like, okay, when you get married, here are all the things you're going to have to struggle with. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry that you struggled with that, but that doesn't have to be my situation too. And that doesn't have to be the things that I go through. And that's a difficult conversation to have and requires a lot of like compassion and awareness from, I think, both sides. And like you said, when our parents move, it's only when you get older, you pay your first bills, that you're like, oh, this is hard. Adulting is really difficult. And we have such a difficult time pretty much, growing up in this country, having the lay of the land decently and everything. I mean, I can't even imagine what it must have been like for my parents. And
exactly,
just have so much more understanding and empathy for them and the way they decided to raise you once you yourself become an adult. And it's like, I wish I had this awareness when I was a kid, but that's just how it goes. And speaking of raising you and your brother, how was that experience? Like, did your parents try to keep you close to home and pretty sheltered? Or were they kind of like, go out there, do whatever you want? What was your experience like?
Yeah, so our expectations from our parents were, like, be good kids and stay at home when you're not at school. And I think I adhered to those expectations more than my brother, right? So because I was raised to be like a good daughter, like I said, like the intergenerational trauma, like that the women in our family carry, they're always like taught to be good daughter, good wife.
Yeah.
And so for me as well, I was taught to be a good daughter, but I don't think the same thing happened for my brother. Not exactly the same way anyways. They wanted him to be like more obedient as well, but he definitely had more freedom than me. And again, it's not to fault my parents, because that's the way that they were raised, and that's the way like our society has kind of conditioned parenting to be, to have like harsher expectations for your daughter because they might be more vulnerable or at risk for something like bad happening. Whereas for boys, it's like, oh, boys will be boys, they can stand on their own.
Yeah.
That kind of mentality, definitely. Like I could see that between me and my brother. And speaking to my boyfriend, who is also Nepali and who grew up here, he's an only son. So for him, he had a lot more freedom growing up as well. Like when we compare our lived experiences here in America as children to first generation Nepali immigrants, it's very different because and part of that has to do with those gender roles and those expectations.
Yeah. And there's this survey that I always think about. I can't remember the specifics of it, but it basically asked a group of women, what would you do at night if you could do anything? And the answers were as simple as like, go for a walk. Because, that's kind of the mindset that our parents come from, is like, you can't even go for a walk by yourself. Like there's this big bad world out there. And I think coming to a different country, not even knowing like what the dangers are, what the specifics of those dangers are in this country, you become so much more understanding to like why they were so strict with you. And I think just hearing about, your parents, like the way they raised you and how women are, in the Nepali community. I want to ask, like, how are women positioned within the Nepali community from your experience? I think you've kind of like touched on it a little bit in terms of your own family structure, but if you're kind of zooming out to the communities you grew up with in Florida, in Southern California, what was that like? And whether you're Nepali or not, if you're watching this and you want to share your own experiences as well, feel free to drop it in the chat box. We'd love to see and hear more perspectives. But yeah, how are they positioned in the wider community?
Yeah. So we were talking about gender roles and, you know, how that's traditional in Nepali culture, where women are expected to kind of be in the kitchen or to take care of the house, whereas men might be expected to just to chill.
Yeah.
You know, and I definitely saw that growing up in my family. And I worked as an intern for Action Works Nepal, this NGO founded by Radha Paudel, who focused on dignified menstruation, right? And I worked there. I worked in Jumla, which is this very rural part of Midwestern Nepal, where the problem of chopari is so prevalent. And chopari is basically segregation of women during menstruation to like a cow shed or to a place like further away from the main family area. And you can see those gender roles and discrimination against women and the violence against women so like in your face there, right?
Yeah.
Women are basically at the bottom of the totem pole, you know, in that culture. And that's like rural Jumla, but that's not only in rural like Nepal, it's also like in the capital city where, you know, there are still traditional roles in place for women and men. And nowadays women are also expected to go and get a job and provide for the family, but also take care of the house, you know. And so that's like Kathmandu, that's like the capital of Nepal, the capital of Nepal. And then I moved here when I was a kid, and in Florida and Southern California too, like those gender roles were still in place, you know, it's still in place in my family. So it's getting better, you know, and it's just very interesting. Like when we have Nepali events and stuff too, the women are all like together hanging out on one side and the men are all hanging out on another side. You know? And those are traditional gender roles in place in a Nepali community in the US. But it's not just the gender roles that are in place, but it's also like violence against women that's in place. You know, I went to this Nepali family friends event where like towards the end of the event, we saw something that was so like, something happened there with a couple, which was so shocking because you wouldn't think that would happen, you know. So basically there was this husband and wife arguing right outside the restaurant, and the wife was telling the husband, "You've had a lot to drink tonight. Can you stop? Like, can you just please go home?" And then he was so like violent towards her in public. He hit her, like he slapped her in public, and she was like crying right there, you know, and this was in front of everybody. So if this happens in front of everybody, then what goes on inside, like, you know, behind closed doors? And we reached out to the woman, and she was very hesitant to get help. You know, she was very hesitant to seek out any of the like resources we provided for her, because there's a huge stigmatization against women who have been victims of violence. Like you would think, you know, the community at large would rally around the victim and try to lift her up and, you know, try to help her and be understanding of that. But there's a lot of victim blaming in our community, which is very unfortunate. And that makes it difficult for the victim to also seek help, to also come forward with their story, you know. And it's just really unfortunate, because one of the things I love about being Nepali is our sense of community, is our pride, you know, around being Nepali. But along with that pride, we have to also recognize that there's this issue that's kind of swept under the rugs, that we as a community have yet to like fully tackle. And it's just so unfortunate to see that. It's really discouraging to see how our community doesn't really rally around the victim.
Yeah.
And that victim blames.
Yeah. And can I ask, like, was this an older couple or were they younger? Like, I just want to get an idea for, like, is this a generational thing? Do you know if this is happening in younger couples? That's just like where my mind goes to immediately.
Yeah, this was an older couple,
Okay.
and I'm gonna say middle age, perhaps.
Yeah. And continue.
Yeah, I think it's more prevalent in older Nepali couples in the older generation. But there is, like a dynamic within the younger generation as well. Like I said, like the intergenerational trauma that we inherit from our like parents basically comes into play maybe in more covert ways and subtle ways.
Yeah. And it's such a learned thing. And I think you start to subconsciously pick these things up. And it's so harmful and so damaging when it's something that is so subconscious and so subliminal that you can't even tackle the root of the issue because it's pervasive. And I think in these types of situations, like you're saying, we blame the victim, but the root cause is the system, is the mindsets. It's not the victim's fault. Like, that doesn't make any sense if you really take a second to think about it. But it's so discouraging how normalized this has become. And even in younger generations, I have personally heard of, people my age, young women being in these types of abusive relationships with South Asian men. And it's just almost so sickeningly natural for them to take it out on women. And it's really discouraging. And I know now when everyone's at home because of COVID, because of quarantine and lockdown and everything, there's even more potential for these types of situations to happen. And when the community you're supposed to rely on is the community that you're afraid is going to turn your back on you, that's another step of isolation that occurs. And I think, like you said, for the intergenerational trauma, we touched on something like being the older brown daughter. This is such a weight that we carry on our backs. And I think a lot of women, especially, they don't identify what they're going through as domestic violence or abuse because it has so many forms. It doesn't need to be the most extreme case for it to count, for it to be valid. I think, we're waiting for these like really extreme markers and we're afraid to name even the smaller things that are taken out against us and seek help for those things.
Exactly. Like when you think of domestic violence, you don't think of other like more subtle things like stalking.
Yeah.
It's very, very common, especially with younger folks in our community. Like younger women in our community face so much of that issue, but that they can't really like name it. It's like, oh, it's a normal thing to be harassed by someone in Instagram. Like,
No. And yeah, Instagram, we forget this can happen online too. It doesn't need to be in your face in person. It's social media and online stalking is a very real thing. And I think it's like a criminal offense. I'm not a lawyer, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure I've read that before, that that's like a persecutable offense. That it's just so disheartening. But
exactly.
Yeah. And it seems like the Nepali community, from what you're saying, is a pretty insular community. It's a small group of people who are really, really close-knit. So in a community that is so close-knit, that has so many layers of pressure and etiquette and so many subtle social rules, as I guess any South Asian community does, is it hard for new ideas to enter this community and just be accepted and discussed?
Yeah, that's interesting that you brought that up. I hadn't really thought about it that way before. I think that's definitely true. We as Nepali people living in the US rely on each other so much because we're such a small group of people, even in the South Asian community. And we're highly protective of each other. We're highly like prideful as well. Like we have a lot of pride around being Nepali. And I think definitely there's a fear that if new ideas were to come in, then we as a group might change our like bonds with each other, like how we connect with each other. I think that's definitely a relevant issue. My friends and I have a group chat where we kind of talk about our community and our parents, and how like if we do anything American, then like our parents might say like, "Oh, American biases, American biases, this is about American biases." Like like, "Oh, you're forgetting your roots.
Yeah.
Don't forget where you come from." And I mean that's valid. Definitely, it's understandable that our parents would have that fear that their children might not carry on the traditions and their values and their Nepaliness. But I think there are other ways to honor our roots, honor our culture, without having to also completely disregard our American experience.
Yes, agreed. And first of all, the group chat, I think having a group chat is the most important thing. I immediately thought of my friends in the group chat that we have. Shout out to them. I think they're watching. So I think so much healing goes on in that group chat. The funny thing is that there's 4 of us and we're all older daughters in South Asian families. And we have vastly different experiences, but we can connect on so many things together. And I think if you don't have a group of people who are open-minded, who you can talk to this about, it's really easy to cement those negative values as the things that we're going to carry on and pass on to future generations. But like you said, there's so much more that defines this community than these types of practices. Like there are so many other things that we could turn to and pass on to our children and future generations in these types of things. So I think that's the biggest thing that needs to be realized. And quick audience question. If anyone is watching right now, the next thing I want to get into is like the pressure to marry within your community, to stay within your community for that. Are you facing that pressure now? And second of all, if you're of an older generation, are you pressuring someone younger to marry within the community, and why? And Dristi, do you have that pressure from your parents? Because I feel like that's like the first thing that my mind turns to when I think of the things that my grandparents say and my parents and things like that.
Yeah. So for me, fortunately, my parents never really brought that conversation up. Well, because I'm also pursuing a medical degree.
Yes.
The focus is on education first, right? Like, focus in school first, and then like whatever happens. So I was fortunate enough to have that kind of like less pressure on me, I guess.
Yeah.
And I happened to date someone who's also Nepali. Like somehow we found each other, we connected. So I was very lucky in that regard. But speaking to my friends who do have that pressure, to marry not just someone Nepali, but someone within their own caste or someone like with a similar background, it's very taxing. I bet it's very taxing emotionally and like draining also like mentally. And it's like that added pressure of like, okay, I need to marry soon, but also I need to marry someone Nepali, someone who's also like in the same caste as me. And how do I do that?
Yeah.
And the parents, they might be trying to help as well. Like, hey, we found someone for you, blah, blah, blah. But then now you've got this added layer of like, okay, I don't even know this person. Now I need to figure out like if I can connect with them or not.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. And like the intercaste marriages and the way that it's looked down upon as well. My boyfriend and I are from different castes. So we're lucky that we're in the US, and I think it's changing in Nepal too. So I don't want to say like every Nepali is like this, but it's kind of like a big topic of like intercaste marriage, and being like how accepting are you of that, because there's caste discrimination within that as well.
Someone dropped in really quickly a really interesting comment that says, as we shed more light and become more intolerant of physical violence, there's a greater tendency towards emotional abuse. So I just want to rewind really quick before I address what you just said. This is, I think, really true. And what we were talking about is that it doesn't have to be the most extreme representation of domestic violence or domestic abuse, it can happen in so many small ways, like controlling your finances, controlling when and where you go and who you speak to and how you dress, like, and belittling someone with these really negative comments about them, like their appearance, their intellect, things like that. I think that is such a good point and something that you should be really wary of. And if it's happening to you, I mean, please do reach out to SAAHAS for Cause at info@saahasforcause.org, because this is a side of things that I think is like not talked about as much, for sure. So thank you for dropping that comment in. But on the marriage thing, it is great to hear that, because the caste system is such a systemic issue. Like, it's become this means and tool, I think, of controlling people, of controlling their lives. And I think the fact that it is changing and people are allowed to love whoever they want, marry whoever they want, is amazing. And there's so much work that needs to be done there. But I'm glad that you feel like it's changing in your community, at least in the US, and that it's like potentially changing in Nepal too. So that is really, really promising to hear. And shifting from all of this to your kind of medical school pursuits, your master in public health pursuits, what inspired you to jump into this field? Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, so growing up in Nepal, there aren't a lot of career choices or options that are seen as prestigious. It's becoming either a doctor, engineer, or lawyer. So I kind of had that ingrained in me, but also when I was younger, I used to go to work with my mom, who is a nurse, and she used to work in a big government hospital in the capital city. And I just loved being there. I just loved being in the hospital so much. And so, what my parents wanted was in alignment with what I wanted.
Yeah, that's great.
And as I got older too, I could see how like medicine could provide so many things for me, so many opportunities of like community service and pursuing science, and also having the ability to advocate for marginalized groups, for like disenfranchised populations, and I was just really attracted to that because I want to do that for my career. I want to pursue that. So I was really lucky in that regard, how like what my parents wanted was in alignment with what I wanted. And I think there was some struggle definitely where I was like, maybe I should pursue something else. Maybe I can work in public health without having to pursue an MD, or I can work in like social science or political science. But at the end, I just gravitated towards medicine because of its practicality as well, and how it could benefit so many people, like how there's lack of physicians in the US and in Nepal as well.
Did you say there's a lack of physicians?
Mm-hmm.
That is so true, and I think it goes across the entire field. I always think of mental health resources and how difficult it is to find a therapist. And yes, you might find a therapist or a physician, but I think having someone of your background, of being South Asian, of being Nepali, like being wherever you're from, is a completely different experience and allows for hopefully a more holistic care experience than before. So I think the lack of physicians, and especially the diversity in physicians, is so important in such an issue. I have friends who have tried to find therapists who understand where they're coming from. They might be a part of the LGBTQ plus community. They might just be South Asian, and it's really, really difficult, I think, to find someone who understands like all those little tiny parts of your identity, because I've had friends, where they'll go to a therapist and they'll be like, okay, my parents are pressuring me to do this. And they'll be like, cut your parents off. Don't talk to them. Don't talk to toxic people. And it's like, I can't do that. Like, it's just not within my community and my culture. Like, this is not applicable information to me. And how do you, in your experience, so you're a third year medical student, do you talk about that in medicine? Is that something that's like becoming like a part of your coursework, just treating people with different backgrounds?
Yeah, that's so, like what you just said struck a chord with me about how, you seek help from mental health professionals or like physicians or any type of health professional, and they might provide advices or like treatment plans that are not in accordance with your own cultural values. And definitely I see the emphasis on cultural competency and medicine throughout my education. I would still have to say, like, we still need to do better work in having more folks from like Black and Brown communities in medicine. We talk about how like we need to represent our patients and we need to advocate for them, but we also need to recruit people from those communities to advocate for those people, to provide health care for those people. Because like you said, like it's just like when you're in a vulnerable state, whether being at a hospital or whether being in a therapist's office, you want someone that can connect with you, that has like similar cultural experiences, or at least someone who is culturally competent, and can empathize with you on that level.
Yeah, and I'm on Twitter. I'm deep on Twitter, and I'm deep on medical Twitter a lot of the times. And there were so many doctors, residents recently tweeting out these very enlightening just pieces of information in light of the Black Lives Matter movement and everything, that says that in medicine, in the textbooks that you use, there are not a lot of people of color. Like, you don't see the representation of certain diseases on bodies of people of color. So one example, and I could be misspeaking, but you will correct me if I'm wrong, was I believe about Kawasaki's disease, where it looks very different on someone who's white than on someone who's Black. But there are never any photos of this disease, for example, on Black or brown bodies. And I think even that is something that we need to be really concerned about, because if you as a doctor are unable to diagnose something because you visually can't see it, because you've never seen it on someone who is of a darker complexion, then that, I think, can lead to so many issues down the road and so many undiagnosed illnesses. And it's the same thing in mental health, actually. It doesn't need to be a physical representation of something. So I think about that a lot. And is that changing? Can we look forward to those changes and just the types of doctors that we're going to have in the future, and the types of physicians that are going to be taking care of people?
Yeah, I think what you said really hammered in that point about how there are a lot of physicians who want to, take care of their Black and brown patients well. They want to learn about conditions that could affect them, or how conditions that we traditionally learn in medicine might look different on them, but just the resources are lacking. There is proper representation, even in textbooks, even in our lectures and stuff. And I want to be hopeful, and I want to say that that is changing. I do go to USC, and our main hospital is LA County USC hospital. So the population that we take care of are predominantly Latino patients, and we get that experience, fortunately, from being on site. And like you said, just by having that kind of gap between the patient and the physician, where the physician is unable to diagnose the patient or dismisses their concerns or even their symptoms, because the physician themselves are not trained on it, can have such downstream repercussions regarding distrust between the patient and the physician, and the community at large, and the physicians. And I think that's harmful for both parties.
Yeah,
we definitely need to do better in terms of making sure that there are textbooks and resources for these patients, and also making sure that there are seats at the table for these Black and brown physicians.
Yes,
physicians of underrepresented groups.
I am so, I think, hopeful to hear you say that, because even in my life, in people my age, there is a distrust of doctors. They're not going to get it, and of mental health professionals. They're not going to get it. I've seen so many people and no one gets it, and that is a really hopeless and isolating place could be where you're like, I don't see a way out of this. So to hear you say that there's like change coming and it's like happening and there's more of this type of consciousness in this field is so, so promising to hear. And if you're watching and if you've ever had an experience with a mental health provider, with a doctor that you have felt like didn't truly address your concerns, we'd love to hear about it as well, because I think knowing that you're not alone, knowing that this is something that a lot of people face can give you so much more hope that you'll like be able to find someone who understands where you're coming from. And I want to get to your personal experience in your MD and PH journey. What is something that stands out, and what is something that you wish people knew about going through this very involved journey?
Yeah. Oh, wow. See, that's one of the things, like everything kind of blurs together. Even though I finished my third year, so, you know, I still have one more year left. And in the grand scheme of things, there's just a lot of significant moments, I feel like, that will stay with me forever. And starting off with like being a first year and coming into medicine and being so excited, and going into gross anatomy and like dissecting a cadaver.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I can't even imagine that. That's wild. Okay.
Exactly. It's like, oh, wow. And then being a third year and now being involved in patient care and being part of the team and kind of creating this treatment plan for this patient. You know, I think that's such a privilege that I have as a medical student to be part of patients' lives in such a vulnerable way, like when they're in such vulnerable state and they trust me and the team to take care of them. That's really humbling for me. And then just something striking as well was when I did my acute care surgery rotation at County. And we had 24-hour calls, and I was on the trauma call team and having patients come in who are near death, you know, and having someone's heart in my hands, like literal hand that I'm like resuscitating. You know? It's just crazy. And like reflecting back on my personal journey, it's like I think about how I didn't really think I could do it. I really have to speak to like the imposter syndrome that's present in medicine as well, especially for like women and women of like color, women of like immigrant backgrounds. It's like, oh, I don't know if I can do it, but seeing the way through the end of the tunnel and seeing how far you've come and how resilient you've become and what you are capable of, like how much you know, has been really empowering as well. And that's one of the things that I would ask people who are entering or who are trying to go to med school to think about is, why do you want to do this? You know, there is such a high burnout rate within medicine and for med students as well. For me personally, I needed that sense of purpose to pull me back in when I had a tough day, you know, at a clinical rotation. Like I needed something to keep me motivated. And I would really encourage people to ask the question, why? Why do you want to do this? And really think about it. Like, are you sure you want to do this? And like, what are you going to, or like, how are you going to face challenges, and what can keep you motivated?
And I think you touch on something so important. From what I understand, your med school essay includes some form of like, why do you want to do this, right? And I think not just for medicine, I think for people in general, no matter what age you are, no matter what phase of your career you're in, figuring out your why, like, why am I doing this? Your purpose is going to get you through, like you said, all those difficult moments. But did you also have like a support system from your community, from your family? Because your mom is obviously in this industry and in this field. So where did you lean on for support when the going got tough?
Yeah, I definitely have to thank my parents for always being there for me, and my partner, my boyfriend also, who always was there to lift me up, you know, when I felt like I couldn't do it. And my close group of friends who always encouraged me, and they were there from the start of my journey, and they're still like with me here today. And the new friends that I made through this journey that I can share my grievances about med school.
Yeah.
Like we said, the group chat thing, for everything. It's so, even like little memes, like silly memes, are very helpful in creating that bond between friends and encouraging people to keep going. And something that I did more in my clinical rotations was trying to do gratefulness journaling and just writing at least 3 things that I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
That really, really helps. It might take just like 10 seconds of your time, but it really helps to pull you through as well, And then definitely my school administration as well, because there were times where I had to talk to someone. I had to talk to my dean about my experiences, and they really pushed me to seek help from like the wellness resources, the wellness center that our school has. So it's really like a collaborative effort, between so many different parts, like so many different people in your life to kind of help this person train in medicine.
Yeah.
You can't really like do it alone, from my experience anyways.
Yeah. And I think if you're going to serve a community, it takes a community to like get you there and to give you all the experiences and like lived experiences to really be the best physician that you can be. And speaking of that, from what you've learned from your parents, from what you've learned from your community, from what you've seen from the work you've done with Action Works Nepal, like what are you carrying on and what are you kind of like infusing into the type of physician you want to be one day? Like what are those intangible, tangible qualities that you want to make sure you embody as someone who's going to be providing care to people?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And this year I've just had a lot of time to reflect back on the last 3 years in med school and also my life before that as well. And I definitely want to carry the sense of community that I have gotten from like the Nepali community and from like the medical community as well. And the sense of purpose that my internship with Action Works Nepal and with Radha Patel gave me.
Yeah.
And like the willingness to advocate, the willingness to always speak up. And I really want to embody that going forward as a physician in a year or two when I graduate.
I am so excited if this is what the face of medicine looks like. Like I am truly so inspired and excited. And I think you bring so much of yourself into this field. And I have friends who are either med students or are considering taking the MCAT, things like that. And I think they're some of the most like you, caring, kind people that I know in my life. And I think so much from what they've said of the med experience has become getting the highest grades, becoming this like OChem machine, like, beating the curve, like all of this stuff that I think the humanity, the conscious aspect gets lost. But to hear someone like you who just sits down and reflects on not just like what you've learned in college and school, but what you've learned through life and meeting all these people and hearing their grievances it's just really, really, I think, promising and inspiring to hear it. I think someone said that it was an inspirational message. So I am so excited for the future of medicine and to hopefully have physicians who can provide that type of holistic care, who understand where you're coming from. So yeah, I just wanted to say that about you really quick.
Thank you. That was really sweet. Yeah, that's so nice of you to say that. And again, like the sense of community, the sense of, building right there as well. Like you lifted me up. And I think that's so important. And and like you said, applying to med school is really a very arduous process. I really feel for all your friends who are applying to medicine right now. It's very tough. I fully acknowledge that. But once you make it through, there are people there to support you, definitely.
That's
you will for sure become a good physician. Like I think the problem is also like not having enough spaces in med schools. That kind of leaves out a lot of like talented, empathetic individuals who would be great physicians. And that's like a fault in the system.
Yeah, agreed. And I know we have like 10 minutes left, so I want to touch on two last topics. So one, we're in a global pandemic. You are in the field trying to find this vaccine, trying to get us out of here. How has your education changed since COVID has started? Has your coursework changed? Oh, and thank you so much to Lax Uncle for saying that. That's so sweet of you. Thank you. But how has COVID changed your coursework and what you're learning about and everything?
Yeah. The start of the pandemic was around March, right? So, well, in the US anyways, our response to it.
True. That's worth noting.
Exactly. And immediately our training was kind of halted. And I haven't been back in the hospital since March because I started my MPH program in May, like right away after finishing my third year. So it has drastically changed how we approach patient care, right? Especially for med students, I think we have that opportunity to see like how COVID patients are being taken care of, but we're not really part of the team. We're not really taking care of the patients ourselves because there have to be precautions in place for students who are training. And the emphasis is really on, well, right now I'm doing my public health master's, and we always talk about COVID-19, like everything we talk about, disaster management, risk reduction, global health, everything is revolving around COVID-19 and how the US is handling it and how we as public health professionals and healthcare professionals are going to be tackling it as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like the medical community at least has some grievances and criticism about how the government aspect is handling this issue. Is that, would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. That's one of the things we always talk about in my public health classes anyways, is how the way that US handled the pandemic from the very start kind of set us up for the status that we're in right now, right? In terms of messaging as well, there was no clear messaging from the top, from the CDC. At the beginning, CDC was saying how no masks are needed, to prevent transmission of COVID-19. It's not going to do anything. And I can see why they said that because they're trying to ration, basically. They're trying to preserve the stock for PPE, right? For healthcare professionals.
Isn't it so heartbreaking that doctors and teachers cannot get the supplies they need, but there are other parts of the government, such as law enforcement, that are armed to the teeth with like thousands of dollars of equipment, and doctors and teachers don't have access to the same resources.
Exactly. It's mind-boggling how the government kind of allocates resources. It's really surprising because the money that you are investing in providing that sort of armor for the police could be used to provide PPE supply for a clinic for like at least a week or something like that. So it's crazy to really think about that. So definitely the messaging from the top has kind of provided kind of like a platform for misinformation to spread as well, like within the larger like global community and also like within the American community and also South Asian communities. It's definitely an issue.
I know, it's kind of shocking to see, but I hope things improve and we get a big wake-up call. But my last question to you, and this is kind of random, so last 3 minutes on this question, but there are so many vulnerable populations, such as senior citizens, such as people who may not know any better, such as the average person who doesn't know too much about pandemics, about healthcare, who are receiving a ton of misinformation on WhatsApp and getting messages. Like I've seen my grandparents get messages where it's like bananas can cure COVID, or like turmeric in your water every day will prevent against COVID. How do we handle misinformation? And are there resources that the people watching can turn to make sure that all these random messages we get on WhatsApp and all these other places, we don't accidentally mistake them for the truth and put ourselves in danger?
Yeah, that is such a big issue, I feel like, in South Asian communities. And that's really unfortunate that the people who are being targeted are the vulnerable populations, like you said, like elderly folks who might not really have or might not really be tech savvy and know how to like block those messages and kind of filter those out, and the great thing about the advancement in technology is also how the health organizations at large are also able to take advantage of that. So the WHO has partnered with WhatsApp and Viber, which is popular in the Nepali community, to create kind of like a health bot that people can chat with and ask these questions with. So it's really a great resource for the populations who are vulnerable to misinformation. And I don't really fault people for trying to find answers, trying to find ways or remedies that they think would prevent COVID. There's a lot of uncertainty right now about the status of COVID-19, and everybody's scared, and people are trying to find ways to deal with that, to cope with that. So it's totally understandable that people are looking towards holistic methods. And I think like it's okay. Like if you want to drink turmeric water, ginger water, by all means, go ahead and do that. But the important thing that you have to keep in mind that it's not going to cure the problem, right? Like I think that's where the harm lies. Like if you're only drinking ginger water, turmeric water, but you're not following social distancing protocols or like wearing a mask when you go outside and standing 6 feet apart, then the harm is there, right? I think we have to definitely make sure that we follow these public health protocols for I don't know how long until we find a vaccine, hopefully, or an efficient vaccine.
Yeah.
Like I think that's so important, especially as we see the surge in cases in the Midwest. It's really important for us to follow these guidelines and definitely sign up for or follow recognized resources like the WHO or the LA County Public Health Department also has great resources. And the unfortunate thing is I don't think they have resources translated in Hindi. So I think it's, again, up to the younger generation to kind of look after their old folks, right? And translate that information for them or like have this conversation with them.
And Atisa Padal brings up such a good point. This is not going to help you if you don't wear a mask. Just like you said, Dristi, like this is not going to help unless you wear a mask. And just because you went to a dinner with your family or friends and you didn't get COVID that time doesn't mean that the risk decreases statistically the next time you go out. The stats are the same every single time you leave the house, every single time you meet someone. It doesn't decrease because you've done X number of dinner parties with family and friends and no one's gotten anything. It's the same level of risk every single time.
Exactly.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing those resources from the WHO. And the fact that they're partnering with WhatsApp and Viber. When we post this recording of the episode, we'll be sure to leave links to that in the description. And also SAAHAS for Causes email, so you can reach out, and you can also sign up for the chatbot that's going to provide you with the most accurate information on a platform that so many of us in the South Asian community already use. So hopefully that's going to make accurate medical information more accessible. And like you said, we're all looking for answers. We're all looking for something to make us feel better. So we can't fault anyone. We have to remember, y'all, the facts are the facts. And right now, social distancing, mask wearing are the only ways that we're going to get through this until we have a vaccine.
Exactly. So well said, Varshini. I completely agree with you.
And Dristi, thank you so much for being here today. We're almost out of time. And a huge, huge, huge thank you to SAAHAS for Cause and Bharat FM for making this show possible once again. We'll be back next month. And finally, in light of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, if you or someone you know is going through something big or small in any form, and you just want someone to talk to, please feel free to reach out to info@saahasforcause.org, and someone from the team will get back to you and connect you with resources. Remember, it doesn't have to be the most extreme case of trauma for it to be valid and for you to seek help and for you to better your life. And again, thank you so much, Dristi, for being here today. And I hope you enjoyed our conversation. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Varshini. And thank you, SAAHAS for Cause and Bharat FM for giving me this platform as well.
Yeah.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.